Hey, what's up guys? In this video we are going to be going over the limiter device in Ableton Live. The limiter device is an audio effect that affects the dynamics of a audio signal. And this might sound a little bit familiar. We were just doing this with the gate, and this device I'm going to be talking about in this video is part of the same group or class or strata of devices. These all affect the dynamics of a audio signal in the time domain. So let's kind of hop to getting things set up here. And I really want to kind of hammer this home because it's very, very important to kind of understand this. So I'm going to go into the packs here and core library, acoustic funk. These are funk drums, and these are very useful and very kind of obvious because acoustic drums take well to dynamics affecting devices. This is what it sounds like, just dry. Bring that down a little bit. Right, those are drums. There's a bunch of things, and it's all recorded, and it's pretty funky. And let's hammer home the thing that I want to hammer home. This is what it looks like in the oscilloscope, by the way. And I need to turn off that auto gain mode. Thank you. All right, so when we're talking about devices and audio effects that affect the dynamics of a signal, what we're really talking about is the dynamic range. This is very important to kind of wrap our heads around. And what dynamic range is let's say we have a loud sound here, a loud in terms of high amplitude, right? Because amplitude is a float between -1, 0, and +1. If we want to break it down, we have very loud. This would be the snare, like very loud, and then we have the quiet part, right? The range between the loudest and the quietest is the dynamic range. And there are devices that can actually take this part of the signal and bring it up closer to the loudest parts. So the dynamic range is essentially being affected. I'm going to show you how to do this. And we've already been doing this, believe it or not. We did this in the gate video, which was the previous video. And a gate is another specialized device. Like, these are all kind of specialized, but the use of them is very kind of very well understood, very kind of they have their uses, right? I'm showing you extremes on both sides. So let's just do a little refresher. I think it's important to do this. So I'm going to drop in a gate here. And all of these devices that affect dynamics, they all have a similar theory of operation, right? There is an imaginary line. Well, it's not imaginary, but let's just draw one to make it imaginary. This line is the threshold. There's the threshold here, right? And this line is the threshold. You set the threshold because these devices are very dumb. They don't know what sounds good. Like, they can't tell. Like, they don't know how to make something sound the way you want it. They're very dumb. So you have to adjust parameters in order to achieve the sound that you want. Like, there's no such thing as a smart kind of dynamics processor. There's some clever things under the hood that makes things sound good, but they can't tell kind of what's being fed into them. They don't know what genre of music. They don't know what the current trend of the day is. They don't know what you're going for. All these things. So you have to really understand what all these controls are doing. So there is a threshold, and what the threshold is and what it does for all of these plugins, all these devices, I should say, is When the amplitude of the audio signal goes above the threshold, this part right here, and then, yeah, just that part. When the amplitude of the audio goes above that threshold, act upon it, right? Don't do anything until we go above that threshold, then act upon it. And that's what the gate is doing. And this is worth going over again. So the gate, what it's doing, is it's only allowing certain sounds, just a quick refresher, it's only allowing sounds to go through once it goes above the threshold, right? It's gating it. Right? And that sounds, it works well on acoustic material, but what we are doing is we are effectively adjusting the dynamic range, right? So this quiet sound is very quiet, and the loud sound kind of pokes through. The dynamic range is being changed. And I'll show you what that looks like here. And I'll just mute that. So let's take a look. You can see that there. I'll get rid of the drawing. Right? More dynamic range. Or sorry, less dynamic range. Those quieter sounds are loud again. Right? We see that here. Right? We see those sounds there. And if we turn on the gate again, those are being cut off. Right? So we're adjusting the dynamics of that signal. Okay, let's move on to the star of the show, star of the video, and that would be the limiter. Now this is a specialized compressor. And this is our introduction to compressors. You got to understand compressors or you won't be able to get very far. A limiter is a specialized dynamics processor that will not allow anything to go above a certain point in amplitude. Right? So we have our invisible line here. This invisible line, the threshold, it is saying, do not allow things to go above, so it will reduce the volume of those peaks right there. And this is similar to when you're on YouTube, let's say, and you're watching a video and the audio is kind of quiet. So you kind of turn it up so it's a comfortable volume, and then you go to the next video and like a really loud ad plays or something like that. You turn it down, right? You are attenuating the volume. And what is the threshold of that? The threshold is what is uncomfortable to your ears in a given situation, right? That's the threshold. And this is how this kind of device works. The limiter works like that. But it's very fast. It's super fast. So what it's effectively doing is it's saying, okay, bring those down and bring those down, but then leave these guys here. So what that is doing is that is squishing those peaks and then leaving those the same, and that is affecting the dynamic range of the loudest and the quietest sounds, right? So the gate, what it did was it kind of removed the quieter sounds and then left the peaks the same. A limiter will leave the quieter sounds, but then squish down the peaks. All right, I hope that makes sense. And I'm going to be demonstrating that more visually as this video goes on. So, you may notice that the limiter does not have a threshold. What the heck is going on here? Well, the threshold is actually the ceiling, because this is very specialized. It's a specialized device. The ceiling is, like a ceiling in your house, or if you're not in a house, in your bus or patio or wherever you are. The ceiling is the most that you're allowing things to go through. And believe it or not, there's already a ceiling in your DAW. There's already a ceiling in Live, and the ceiling is 0 dB. If you try to go above that, it'll just shave it off. It'll just cut it. And that is digital clipping. You don't want that to happen. So you want to reduce those peaks in a transparent way so you don't get clipping. And that's what a limiter does. I've had a limiter on the master for a while. Remember when I said, I'm going to put this in here, don't worry about why I'm doing it, we'll get into that later. That's why. The ceiling is negative 0.3 dB, right? Because dB is a relative scale. I am preventing the audio from Ableton Live to go above 0, because if it does on the master, it will, you'll hear it in my screen recording program, and it'll clip and it won't sound very pleasant. So this is a safety measure. This is what a limiter does. It's just don't allow things to go over this amount. And that's not going to be the end of the video, because there's some important fundamental things involved with compressors that I want to introduce, because they're very important and able to be able to understand them and understand their usage, right? Because a limiter is just a compressor, right? And if I can introduce ideas with the limiter, and then I go on to the compressor, you will have light bulb moments, and it'll be really fun. So that's what a limiter does. And the ceiling is the value, the threshold. It says do not go above this value. That's what a limiter does, and it's very good at it. And I'll just demonstrate what that is going to do here. I'm going to bring this ceiling down, and you can look at the signal analyzer, the time domain here. I'll bring that down. Right, so what's going on here? We have this readout here, and this is the gain reduction, right? Remember when I said that, you know, the analogy of watching a YouTube video and it's loud, so you turn it down? This is what it's doing, right? It's reducing that volume, but it's doing so very, very quickly. Very quickly. Superhuman quick. And limiters are very special because they have a very fast attack. They have something called look ahead, and the release is dependent on what's being kind of fed into it. We'll get into those kinds of things a little bit later. But that is essentially what's happening. It's bringing down those loud parts. And I'll just turn it on and off, and you can see what's going on here. Oh, I might want to go to there. There we go. So yeah, we got those peaks going on there. Yeah, peaks are going through. Limiter on. Those peaks are squished. They are squished into the body of that. And that's affecting the dynamic range, right? This is very important to kind of understand here, I think anyway. So let's clear, and I will go on to explain things further. All right, so we are going to be looking at the effect of changing the dynamic range of a signal, right? So the ceiling has been dropped down. I'm going to add in something called a utility, which we covered, and I'm going to increase the gain, because when we bring down the ceiling like this, it will squish those loud parts, and it'll make it kind of quieter compared to what it was, like so. So you want to do something called makeup gain. And this is done with a lot of compressors. The makeup gain will bring the volume back up, right? These are usually built into the dynamics processor, and a lot of them have an automatic makeup gain. So when you bring down the threshold or the ceiling, it will bring the makeup gain up automatically, so you don't have to compensate, which is very useful. So check this out. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that. This is going to be we'll call this, the dry signal. This one right here is a dry signal. And we will look at it in this section in the session view here. And let's see where it peaks. And I'll just open that up so you can see that. Right, we're peaking at negative 6 dB. Right? And this right here, let's just look at that. right? This has the limiter and the makeup gain on it. All right, okay, so let's just turn both of these off. We can see them grayed out, and they are both peaking at -6 dB. All right, cool. Let's listen to the dry drums here. All right, let's listen to the limited drums with the makeup gain. Right, they are louder. And they are louder because we have changed the dynamic range of those. And I'm going to actually, I'm gonna group these together. And this is really interesting about like how our ears work. And this is the introduction to the loudness wars. But let's group those. I'm going to pan one left and one right. I'm going to move this signalizer into this group here. So the signalizer will, because the dry is left, and then the limited with the makeup gain is right, we should see these in the spectrum kind of separated. Let's go, yeah, separate. And I'll just turn those off. And check this out. All right, so look at that. Same sound playing at the same time. And we notice that the amplitude, peak amplitude, is the same for both of these. And I'll make it a little bit more obvious. And let's do that, and then maybe, yeah, maybe like a purpley sort of thing. That looks cool. Right, so basically same peak here, but things are being squished down, and obviously the orange waveform is the limited signal. And this is a compressed signal. And that's where compression comes in. We're affecting it in such a way so that the quieter sounds, right? The purple here are the quieter sounds. We're bringing those up. We're making the quieter sounds louder, right? And that's done with the automatic, not the gain and the compression mixed together. And I'm just going to show you what that kind of looks like. I'm going to take the utility off. Right? So this is what it looks like with the makeup gain off. Okay? So all these purple friends here have been squished down. Right? That is, you know, the imaginary line of limiting. Anything above that is now squished down, but then the quieter parts are left alone. Right? Really interesting. So that's effectively what's going on. So if you bring the gain back up, and I'll try to show you what that looks like here. Right, we'll see that gain kind of compensate, and it basically brings everything up in loudness. I hope that makes sense. And that's our introduction to compression, and that is what limiting can do. Limiting can do a bunch of other really cool things, but let's look at this more so. What I'll do, I'll just bring this back into there, and I will ungroup, which is a very useful setting there. So let's look at what actually occurs in a real world setting. And before I do that, I want to kind of explain the gain knob here. So the gain is, you know, think of like the ceiling would be this imaginary line, right? And that is static. That is there. Let's just pretend it's there. And a lot of leveling, they're called leveling amplifiers, operate in this way. They have a set threshold, right? This is just another way of going about it. And what you do is you feed the audio, I'll go into the clip here, you feed the audio into the, I call it a detector circuit because that's what it was called, but we'll feed the audio in terms of its amplitude into that, and that's essentially what the gain is doing. Because a lot of the old school leveling amplifiers, you would just have a gain. You just drive it into the threshold, and then you'd have a peak reduction knob. Look up the LA2A. That's basically how it works there, and that's how the gain works in the limiter here. The look ahead is very, very interesting and useful to understand. I'm just going to give you like a brief idea of what's going on here. And I'll turn off the separation here. And let's just go mid, why not? Okay. So I'm going to get into this in the next video, so I'm going to be very careful about what I'm going to say. When we're talking about the attack of a dynamics processor, we're talking about the reaction time. So imagine like a really loud commercial comes on, or ad or whatever. In my day, we would watch movies on TV. The movie would be really quiet, and then the advertisements would play every 30 seconds, and they'd be really loud. And now there's laws against that. But anyway, the attack is the reaction time, how long it takes for the dynamics processor to act upon it to reduce the volume. A limiter has a very fast attack, but it can be a little bit slow depending on how fast how packly tight these are. It might not, and this is very real. It might not, like if this is like if it goes from very quiet to very loud, it might not detect this peak, or it'll detect it, but it won't be able to react fast enough, right? And then this one will be brought down, but this one will remain the same. And how we overcome this is we introduce a little bit of latency, or the device does. We don't do anything. And this will prevent those peaks from popping through. The look ahead is like 3 milliseconds. So what it does is it adds a little bit of delay. It says, okay, given that certain frequencies you won't be able to detect, you'll be able to detect them, but you won't be able to act upon them fast enough. Let's just give you a buffer. And that is essentially what the look ahead is doing. And we can demonstrate this in the further videos, but essentially you want to have look ahead. Limiters can't really operate without look ahead, right? We're just offsetting the signal by 3 milliseconds, 6 milliseconds. Usually 3 is good, but if you're using extreme values of gain reduction, you might want to go up higher. It should be very well understood that we need a little bit of latency for it to be fast enough to react, right? Because this is, again, very specialized. The release is how fast after the peak it will, after it goes above the, the ceiling, how fast it will kind of return back to normal. And this is very important because if we look at this, right, we have, let's say there's pick a different color here. Let's say there's the threshold, right? It goes above the threshold. Okay, great. Let's figure this out, right? It will reduce that, and then reduce that. But when we get to around here, it will say this point in time between here and here, it'll say, okay, cool. We have effectively, squished all those loud transient parts, right? Let's bring the volume back up. We do that, and then we get, there was something else here that was a little bit farther away, and then we'll have to bring that down very quickly. That can if it's really fast, that can cause some distortion that is not very pleasant. Right, so what's happening here is there's, volume, volume, volume. These things happen, and then the volume is reduced, and then it'll go back up around here, and then, oh, that happened, so it'll go back down again and do that. That can, depending on how fast it is, kind of round out that. You want it to be like very smooth, right? You want it to be transparent. And I'll show you an example of what that sounds like, let's just say. I could demonstrate it with a DC signal, but let's just get it popping here. So let's listen to it, and we'll use, lots of compression, right? With the ceiling down. I'll bring this down. And right now the release is set to auto. And this is, it's very smart. It will, what does it say? It'll say something. The limiter automatically adjusts the release time based on the characteristics of the input. So when you disable this, it will no longer do that. So there's a lot of really smart things going on under the hood. And when we get into very specialized limiters, like, FabFilter Pro L2 and all these other ones, they have automatic release algorithms under the hood made for certain types of music. Some are more aggressive, some aren't. Really clever stuff. And what makes a limiter is the release, the automatic release. So let's just have the release set to 0.01, which is an extreme example of what I drew out there. And I'll just bring that down, bring the ceiling down too. Right? We have a very fast release, and it's doing some wacky stuff to the sound. It's causing some distortion. And we can mitigate that and make it more transparent by increasing the release, giving it a little bit of time to rise back up, because we'll notice here with this readout, we can see the actual gain reduction. I'll give that a play. Right, very, very fast release time, right? If I slow it down to 3 seconds, right, it doesn't have a chance to fully go back up to 0. That release would be a little too long. But you notice with very fast release times, we got distortion, and it's not that pleasant. So we have to give the limiter enough time to recover those little peaks along the way that I showed you, in order so it doesn't, clip out. Right? We'll notice right here, right? The kick drum, right? And it's affecting the kick drum. It is more pronounced on the kick drum because those cycles are far apart, right? These guys right here, right? These are far apart, right? They're lower frequency. So, right, the limiter, has to have more time to recover in between those. So if we listen to the kick and I make the release faster, which is not recommended for that kind of material, right? Could be what you're looking for, but we're introducing some wacky clipping stuff in there, and it's, not that. I mean, it could be something that we're going for. It depends on the music and the people say program material. But if we have it set to auto, it's actually pretty smart. That gets grayed out. Right? And we'll notice that with a fast release, it sounds like it's being squished. But with a slower release, right, we still get the gain reduction, but it sounds more, now here's a keyword, transparent. We, for the most part, strive to have dynamics control that is transparent, that is not obvious, right? This does not sound like a drum kit. right? But this, that does more so, right? It's still heavily squished, but I'm exaggerating for the sake of example. This is what we strive for. So when you hear terms like, this is a very transparent compressor, that's what it's essentially talking about. And again, this is the importance of release making things sound transparent and good. But rules are meant to be broken, and I enjoy using extreme amounts of obvious compression or limiting for a special effect. Right? You can have like a lead sound, and you can do that, and you can colorize the lead, things like that. There are no rules. Don't freaking listen to anyone. Don't even listen to me. I don't know what I'm talking about. There's no rules in terms of what's going on here. It just comes down to taste and flavor and, I guess, music and what you're doing. So that's a brief rundown of a limiter. So what else is a limiter used for? We've just used it on a single track. I've demonstrated what it does. It makes essentially quiet sounds louder, or louder sounds quieter. It adjusts the dynamic range. Let's do that, and let's use this on a track. So here's a jam that I'm working on that is going to be a little bit of a video, and we have a limiter on the master here. And yeah, let's just give this a play here. Right, it's a techno jam. We're doing great. Let's just, they're all grouped in this one thing here. I'll just get rid of those. So they're all grouped here. Let's put a limiter on this. And what this is doing is this is, squishing things that go above. But remember when I was saying, and I demonstrated, that we can bring the ceiling down and adjust the gain, or a mixture of both, and we can have a utility afterwards, let's say. And we can make it sound louder. And we can make the quieter sounds louder, and the louder sounds quieter, making it seem a bit more uniform. Right? So this is my track here. Like, it's like, we got the kick, bass, and then we have percussion, and then we have a little synth thing there. Like, these are all, they all have, the range of dynamics is quite different. But if I were to squish those together, I am kind of sort of gluing it together, which is a nudge to the next video, but I'm actually making it louder, perceivably louder. And this is called maximizing. And, there are limiters that are called maximizers. They're essentially the same thing. It all comes down to marketing. Let's bring down to the ceiling. Right? I've effectively squished some things, and I can play around with the look ahead. Right? A little bit of fuzziness because the look ahead is very short, doesn't have enough time to react. So I'll go back to 3. I'll go to 6. Right? Extreme amounts of look ahead aren't that necessary for the most part. So just stick to 3 milliseconds. But let's check out the release. Right? So with a slower release, that round kick drum is getting some distortion-y stuff going on there, because it's going back to normal too quickly, and we're getting some nasty stuff there. So yeah, let's just dial that in. Right, we can hear it. It's nasty around this point, right? And it really depends on the what you're actually working on. Acoustic rock drums do not have this kind of low end, so your release will be different. This has a lot of low end, so the release has to be set accordingly. And we're having a little bit of gain reduction here. Well, a lot of bit actually, but let's just say it's negative 6 dB. And essentially, yeah, this is making it seem louder. Let's actually give ourselves some makeup gain here with the utility. I'm gonna not the tuner. Well, I could tune it, but whatever. Let's group these together, and I'll just increase the gain here. Let's look at what it is like default. Right, so it's it is peaking, but let's bring this up. All right, so I've given it 3.33 repeating dB of makeup gain, and let's turn this on and off. Notice what happens to the lead. Everything gets louder, and that is what a limiter is very, very useful for. You can use it for a bunch of things. You can use it on a single track. You can use it for a safety measure on your master. You can also put everything into one group and make it sound cool. And this is done all the time. Limiters are very useful. Again, release, very important. I have it set to auto most of the time. But right, but I like to dial it in just because I'm from the old school. That's what I do. So that was the limiter, and I hope I explained it well. I hope you learned stuff. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.